fellow time travelers, those who journey through the threads of history with open hearts and minds. Now, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment. Allow yourself to be free from the distractions of the world around you, to step into the quiet space between moments. Picture yourself not as you are now, but as someone who is about to embark on a journey through time, a journey into the heart of something timeless and profound. Let the weight of the world fade away, and let your imagination transport you to another place, another time. In this space, where only the breath of the present matters, we will uncover stories that transcend time itself. Imagine, if you will, a room bathed in the soft, golden glow of a single candle, flickering gently in the dark. The light is warm, calming, yet subtle, casting long shadows that stretch across the floor. The air is thick with the earthy, comforting scent of freshly ground tea leaves. This fragrance, delicate yet profound, carries with it the weight of centuries, a quiet reminder of rituals practiced over time, of warriors and poets, of emperors and commoners, all united by this simple act. It is a fragrance that speaks of both simplicity and complexity, of quiet peace amidst the chaos of life. In this room, there is a man, his figure calm, poised, yet grounded. He wears a simple kimono, nothing extravagant, nothing to draw attention to himself. His hands, steady and practiced, move with a quiet elegance, each gesture deliberate, each motion an expression of something much deeper than the surface action. He kneels before a small tea bowl, his movements graceful and purposeful, the entire world contained within this single moment. His eyes are focused, his entire being absorbed in this delicate task. The world outside, it no longer exists. The clamor of everyday life, the noise, the ambition, the stress of the world, all of it fades into nothingness. It's as if time itself has suspended its ticking, allowing you to breathe freely without the weight of time pressing on you. The busy streets, the rushing crowds, the constant hum of technology, all of it vanishes. In this moment, the only thing that matters is here and now, this fleeting slice of time that you are fully immersed in. There is only this moment, this act of creating something beautiful, something pure. And then, you hear it, the gentle whisk of tea against the porcelain bowl, the sound faint but steady. It's like the breath of life itself, steady, constant, and unhurried. The whisk, moving rhythmically, stirs not just the tea, but the air itself. Each soft flicker of sound fills the space around you, as though inviting you to align with its rhythm, to enter into the stillness of the present. The silence in the room is profound, heavy with meaning. There is no need for words, no need for explanations. In the simplicity of this act, the complexity of the world falls away. Every movement, every gesture, is full of intention. In this stillness, something happens. It's as though the entire world pauses, just for you, just for this moment, where everything becomes aligned and connected, as if time itself has bowed to the ritual. And as you stand in this sacred quiet, you realize that you are a part of something far larger than yourself, something simple, yet infinite. You feel it, a peace that is not fleeting, but eternal. It's a peace that doesn't come from external circumstances. but from something deep inside. This isn't just the peace of quiet, this is a peace that radiates from the heart, born of simplicity, humility, and grace. It's a feeling that can't quite be put into words, yet it moves through you, through every breath, through every moment of stillness. This was the essence of Sen no Rikyū's life. He was not a conqueror, not a warrior, nor did he lead armies. He was a man who saw the world differently, and through his simple yet profound act of preparing tea, he changed the very spirit of Japan. Sen no Rikyū understood that true strength, the kind that transcends all the noise and chaos of life, lies not in grandeur, not in force, but in simplicity. He believed that the most profound wisdom in life is hidden in the smallest of acts, in the most humble of gestures. He taught us that peace can be found in the most ordinary moments, in the quiet that exists, in the pauses between breaths, in the act of being. The world outside, it no longer exists. The clamor of everyday life, the noise, the ambition, the stress of the world, all of it fades into nothingness. It's as if time itself has suspended its ticking, allowing you to breathe freely without the weight of time pressing on you. The busy streets, the rushing crowds, the constant hum of technology, all of it vanishes. In this moment, the only thing that matters is here and now, this fleeting slice of time that you are fully immersed in. There is only this moment, this act of creating something beautiful, something pure. And then you hear it, the gentle whisk of tea against the porcelain bowl, the sound faint but steady. It's like the breath of life itself, steady, constant, and unhurried. The whisk, moving rhythmically, stirs not just the tea, but the air itself. Each soft flicker of sound fills the space around you, as though inviting you to align with its rhythm, to enter into the stillness of the present. The silence in the room is profound, heavy with meaning. There is no need for words, no need for explanations. In the simplicity of this act, the complexity of the world falls away. Every movement, every gesture is full of intention. In this stillness, something happens. It's as though the entire world pauses, just for you, just for this moment, where everything becomes aligned and connected, as if time itself has bowed to the ritual. And as you stand in this sacred quiet, you realize that you are a part of something far larger than yourself, something simple, yet infinite. In today's world, it's easy to get lost in the rush to move from one task to the next, to check the boxes, to get ahead, to keep going. But what if the most important thing we could do, right now, is slow down? What if, in slowing down, we found something far more precious than the pursuit of success, something deeper, something quieter, but ultimately more fulfilling? Sen no Rikyū believed that peace doesn't come from achievement, from victory, from what you can hold in your hands. It comes from embracing the moment as it is, from finding beauty in simplicity, and from accepting the imperfection of life. Through his tea ceremony, he found a path to inner peace, a peace that was not fleeting, not external, but lasting and deep. He taught that true strength comes from embracing simplicity, from finding joy in the small things, from making the most of the present moment. Think about it for a second. What could we learn from him? What could we discover about our own lives if we embraced the way he saw the world. If we paused and paid attention to the details, the quiet moments, the imperfection that surrounds us, could we also find peace, even in the chaos of our lives? If this speaks to you, if you feel the weight of these words, I invite you to share with me. When was the last time you had a moment like that? A moment where you just were, where you were fully present and aware of the peace around you. It doesn't have to be anything grand, just a small moment. Take a moment and share it in the comments below. I'll be reading your thoughts, reflecting on them as we continue this journey. And if you're finding this story of simplicity and peace captivating, I encourage you to like this video because, trust me, this journey into the world of Zen no Rikyū will take you deeper than you ever expected. If you're new to this channel and feel drawn to these teachings of stillness, reflection, and mindfulness, subscribe so you don't miss any more stories of remarkable individuals whose lives were built on principles that resonate deeply within us all. Zen no Rikyū was a man who, in a time of conflict and chaos, found peace in the most humble of actions. He transformed the simple act of making tea into an art form, a philosophy, a way of life. And while his story is marked by hardship, loss, and political intrigue, the essence of his legacy is that of peace, not just the peace of a moment, but the peace that comes from living a life of integrity, simplicity, and mindfulness. So, join me now as we embark together on a journey through the extraordinary life of Zen no Rikyū. We'll delve into the profound teachings that lie at the heart of his story, uncovering how his tea ceremonies were far more than just rituals or elegant performances. They were, in fact, gateways to a deeper understanding of life itself, a reflection of the simplicity, the humility, and the peace he lived by. Through the quiet act of preparing tea, Rikyū showed us how we might better connect to the fleeting moments of our own lives. As we follow Rikyū's journey, we'll encounter moments of triumph and trial, moments that, though distant in time, still offer us timeless lessons. His story will teach us how to embrace the present moment fully, to see the beauty in what others might dismiss as imperfect, and to find peace even in the chaos of our own lives. We'll come to understand that his legacy is not just about tea, but about a way of being in the world, a way that's rooted in the acceptance of the fleeting, the appreciation of the simple, and the love of the present. So, let's take a step together into this journey, this adventure, into the life and teachings of Zen no Rikyū. In his footsteps, we'll discover not just how to prepare tea, but how to approach the world with the same grace, the same humility, and the same mindful awareness that he did. Let's begin this exploration, side by side, into the world where each moment is a chance to pause, reflect, and truly live. The year was 1522, and Sakai, Japan, was a city pulsing with life. It was not just any port town, it was a crossroads of the world, where cultures collided, and the hum of merchants filled the streets. The clink of coins, the rhythm of bartering, and the distant calls of traders from across the seas blended into the symphony of everyday life. Sakai, a city on the coast of Japan, thrived on commerce, where goods from China, Korea, and distant lands poured in, while Japanese silk, porcelain, and fine goods were sent out. Here, Power and wealth were not just abstract concepts. They were tangible, molded in the swift exchanges of trade and the flow of currency. In this bustling world, where ambition and profit were the lifeblood, Rikyū's family carved their living as part of the vast commercial fabric. Rikyū was born into this world of trade and enterprise. His father, a man of sharp wit and keen instincts, was deeply immersed in the daily operations of the business. A merchant at heart, he could negotiate deals with a glance, and his hands were constantly at work, moving goods in and out of the bustling shop. Rikyū's early days were spent following his father around the marketplace, learning the art of negotiation, how to handle delicate silks, and how to recognize the worth of precious goods. He spent long hours in the back rooms of the family store, watching as transactions were made, with goods exchanged for coins or promises, where sharp words and even sharper glances were exchanged between traders. The marketplace itself was a living thing, constantly in motion. The clamor of voices, the clatter of carts, the scent of freshly traded spices, and the feel of foreign silks that slipped through his fingers, soft and full of mystery. The market was full of contradictions, wealth and poverty standing side by side, cultural fusion creating new patterns, and the tension between the material world and the spirit. Rikyū felt himself drawn into this, yet, despite the energy and excitement that the market offered, there was something about it that didn't sit well with him. He couldn't put it into words yet, but something was missing. The endless negotiations, the clash of coins, the hustle, they felt like a performance, something fleeting, never quite satisfying. Even in the bustle of his father's shop, Rikyū could sense the emptiness beneath the glitter of gold. From an early age, he developed a restlessness, a sense that there was something more to life than the material world around him. His mind, always curious and searching, couldn't reconcile the busy transactions with the quiet ache that gnawed at him, the sense that he was meant for something different. Where his father's mind was trained to see the worth of objects, Rikyū found himself drawn to the unseen, the impermanent nature of life that the marketplace seemed to gloss over. In the evenings, as the family shop closed, Rikyū would wander the streets of Sakai, his eyes not fixed on the goods for sale, but on the quiet corners of the city. He found solace in the whispers of the wind, the rustling of leaves, the fleeting sight of a flower blooming in a small, forgotten garden. These small moments, the quiet beauty of life that could not be measured by coins, began to stir something deep within him. The restlessness in him grew stronger with time. Where his father saw the world as a place to be conquered through trade, Rikyū felt an unspoken pull toward a world that existed beyond commerce, beyond the transient nature of material things. He began to ask questions no one seemed to have answers to. What was the true meaning of life? Was there more to existence than the constant accumulation of wealth and the expansion of power? Even at such a young age, Rikyū knew he was not content with the life his father had carved out. There was a deeper question that would not go away. What is the essence of life beyond what we can touch and hold? A question that would follow him throughout his life, pushing him towards the world of tea and Zen. While his family was rooted in the bustling material world, Rikyū began to feel a longing for stillness. In the noise of the marketplace, he longed for quiet. In the pursuit of wealth, he longed for peace. And in the glimmering walls of wealth, He sought something genuine, a connection to something deeper, something that could not be touched by the hands of commerce. This yearning, subtle at first, began to take root within him as he observed the world, quietly watching the ebb and flow of life around him. The more he watched, the more he realized. The world of merchants, though full of activity, was incomplete. His father's focus on profit and expansion began to feel distant, almost hollow, as if the true essence of life was lost amidst the noise of transactions. And in this realization, a seed was planted within Rikyū, a seed that would grow and guide him toward a path he could not yet see, a path rooted in the quiet and impermanent nature of tea and the Zen teachings that would soon shape his future. Rikyū was still young, but already he was beginning to sense a quiet calling, a pull toward something far deeper than the world he had been born into. Something that, like the flicker of a candle in the quiet night, was both present and fleeting, like the very nature of life itself. And though he did not know it yet, that path would lead him far from the world of merchants and into the spiritual heart of Japan's culture, the world of tea, where he would learn to embrace the beauty of simplicity and the impermanence of life. This was only the beginning, but the quiet discontent of the merchant's world had set in motion a change in Rikyū that would define not only his life, but also reshape the way Japan understood tea, beauty, and life itself. One autumn afternoon, when Rikyū was still a young boy, he followed his father to a local tea house. The shop was tucked away from the busy streets, a quiet oasis amidst the chaos of the town. Rikyū had heard whispers of this tea house, where the finest tea was served in a room that felt like a world apart from the bustling marketplace. As they entered, Rikyū was struck by the simplicity of the room. There were no grand decorations, no displays of wealth. The tatami mats were worn, and the paper shoji doors creaked slightly as they opened. A low fire burned in the corner, the only source of light and warmth. The smell of fresh tea leaves hung in the air, earthy and soothing, like a forgotten memory. In the corner of the room, an elderly tea master sat, preparing tea with movements so graceful, so deliberate, that Rikyū felt as though he were watching a dance. The way the master held the tea whisk, the way his hands moved through the air with a fluidity that seemed almost otherworldly, it was as if time itself had slowed. Rikyū's father, noticing his son's rapt attention, chuckled softly and said, "It's just tea, Rikyū. Why do you look so fascinated?" But Rikyū didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the tea master, who, without a word, began to prepare the tea for him. The sound of the whisk in the bowl was the only sound that filled the room. As the tea master poured the hot water into the bowl, the steam rose in delicate spirals, the fragrance of the tea filling the space, mingling with the fire's warmth. A single drop of water may not seem much, but it is enough to make the tea whole. The tea master spoke suddenly, his voice low but steady. Rikyū was startled by the words, as though the master had read his thoughts. "The tea is like life," the master continued. "It is not the perfect ingredients that matter most, but the way they come together. It is the moment when simplicity becomes profound." Rikyū felt something stir inside him. He had heard his father speak of wealth and status, of business deals and the art of negotiation. But these words, spoken so simply, seemed to hold something far greater, something deeper. Later that evening, Rikyū sat alone by the garden pond, the day's events weighing heavily on his mind. The cool breeze rustled the leaves, and he could hear the soft ripple of the water. He thought about the tea house, about the serenity he felt in that room, surrounded by nothing but simple utensils, the warmth of the fire, and the quiet sound of the tea being made. It was a stark contrast to the world of commerce he was used to, with its noise and chaos, the constant rush to get ahead. Tea is not the same as wealth, Rikyū thought to himself. It is not about acquisition or power. It is something else. The words echoed in his mind as he sat, watching the moonlight play on the surface of the water. Simplicity is beauty, he whispered, remembering the tea master's words. As the days passed, Rikyū could not shake the feeling that something had changed inside him. He still helped his father with the shop, but his heart wasn't fully in it anymore. He found himself returning to the tea house in secret, just to watch the tea master at work. Each time, the feeling of peace would wash over him like a soft wave, calming his restless soul. One evening, after a particularly long day in the market, Rikyū found himself at the tea house once again. As he entered, the tea master was waiting for him. Without a word, the old man gestured for him to sit, and began preparing tea. "Why do you come, young one?" the master asked, his voice gentle but knowing. Rikyū, his heart full of questions, responded, "I don't know. There's something here, something beyond the tea, something I can't explain, but I want to understand it." The tea master nodded slowly, as though he had anticipated the question. He poured the tea into a delicate bowl and placed it in front of Rikyū. "It is the same with life," he said softly. "The answer lies not in seeking perfection, but in embracing what is. You must learn to see beauty in simplicity, to find peace in the moment. When you learn to see, you will understand." Rikyū stared into the bowl of tea, watching the surface ripple gently as steam rose from it. It was as though the entire universe was held in that simple bowl, as though in the swirling depths of the tea, everything Rikyū had been searching for was contained: calm, simplicity, clarity. He had not yet understood the meaning of the tea master's words, but something inside him had clicked. He knew that this was the path he was meant to follow. Tea, simple and humble as it was, had the power to calm the mind, to connect one with the world in a way nothing else could. And though he still didn't understand the full depth of it, he felt an unexplainable pull toward this quiet art. Later, as Rikyū sat by the garden pond once more, he began to reflect on the teachings of his father, his family's world of commerce, and the path of tea. Tea is like life, he thought, recalling the master's words. It is not the perfect ingredients, but the way they come together. And in that simplicity, there is peace. In that peace, there is beauty. Rikyū began to understand. Tea was not about mastery over nature or the world, but about harmony with it. It was about embracing the flow of life, accepting its impermanence, and finding grace in the simplicity of each moment. In that, he found something far more valuable than wealth or power. He found meaning. His journey had only just begun. He didn't know it yet, but the world of tea would lead him far from his family's business. It would become the thread that connected him not only to Japan's rich cultural heritage, but to something far deeper, a path of understanding, of simplicity, and ultimately, of peace. Sen no Rikyū had spent his early life in the vibrant, busy world of merchants and commerce in Sakai, but his heart, though young, yearned for something more. He felt the stirrings of something deep inside, a quiet tug toward a path that seemed at once distant and familiar. This pull would lead him toward the world of tea, not just as a drink, but as a way of life, a path that would eventually define his existence. However, he would need guidance. He needed a teacher who could show him the true essence of tea. That teacher came in the form of Takano-jo, an elderly Zen monk and revered tea master, whose reputation extended far beyond the simple preparation of tea. Jo was known not only for his skill with tea, but for his ability to see beyond the surface, to understand the quiet depths of the human heart. When Rikyū first met him, it wasn't in a grand tea ceremony, nor amidst a gathering of the powerful and the influential. It was in a small, unassuming space, the kind of place Rikyū had grown up knowing, humble, yet filled with a quiet strength. The first encounter between Rikyū and Ju was not marked by words. It was one of those rare moments where a single glance could speak volumes. Rikyū had walked into the room hesitantly, unsure of what to expect. The air in the small tea room was still, filled only with the soft fragrance of tea leaves and the distant sound of water bubbling over a low fire. Jo, seated on a low cushion at the far end of the room, didn't look up at first. His hands moved gracefully, preparing the tea, each action flowing into the next, with a sense of purpose that transcended the physical. There was a quietness in the room that filled the space like a living thing. It wasn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of something much deeper. After a few moments, Ju looked up and met Rikyū's eyes. His gaze was calm, filled with a wisdom that seemed to speak directly to Rikyū's soul. "Why do you come, young one?" Ju asked, his voice steady and deep, like the sound of distant thunder. "You seek tea, but what do you truly seek?" Rikyū, for the first time in his life, found himself speechless. What did he seek? He had been drawn to tea, yes, but was it just the tea itself? Was it the calm it brought him, the moments of stillness in a world filled with noise? Or was there something deeper, something more profound at work? "I seek peace," Rikyū finally whispered, his voice quiet, unsure. "I want to understand the world in a way that words cannot explain. Tea calls to me, master, but I do not yet know its meaning." Jo's lips curved into a small smile, and his eyes softened with understanding. He said nothing for a long time, allowing the silence to settle between them. Then, with a steady hand, he gestured to the tea bowl in front of Rikyū. "Tea is a reflection of life itself," Ju said slowly, his voice almost like a prayer. "It is not about the leaves nor the water. It is about the way we see." Rikyū watched as Ju slowly stirred the tea, the whisking motion gentle but purposeful. "Tea is not a drink," Ju continued. "It is a way of being, of embracing the moment. When you prepare tea, you must not just make tea, you must be the tea. In the stillness, in the simplicity, you will find the answers you seek. But first, you must see clearly." The words settled in Rikyū's heart like seeds in fertile soil. He was deeply moved, though he didn't fully understand. What did it mean to be the tea? To see clearly? As the evening wore on, Ju did not explain further, but instead guided Rikyū through the movements of tea preparation. The young boy was taught to hold the whisk with a steady hand, to stir the tea in a fluid motion, to pour the hot water in a perfect arc. Each movement was slow, deliberate, and filled with meaning. Joe's hand would occasionally hover near Rikyū's, offering guidance without words. To make tea is to be mindful, Ju explained softly as they worked together. To be mindful is to be present in every moment. In every movement, there is a chance to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. When you prepare tea, you prepare yourself. You learn not just to serve tea, but to serve life itself. And as Rikyū stirred the tea that evening, he felt something shift deep inside him. The act of whisking the tea was no longer just about the task at hand. It was no longer mechanical. It was a meditation. His hand moved with intention, with care, with quiet focus. And in that stillness, the world outside seemed to fade. In the tea, Rikyū thought to himself, there is no judgment. There is no striving for perfection. There is only this moment, and this moment is enough. And as the days passed, Rikyū's understanding of tea deepened. The simple acts of preparing tea, the flick of the wrist, the pouring of water, the steady whisking became an expression of Zen itself. The more he practiced, the more he realized that tea was not just an external act. It was about an internal alignment. The movements of his body, the focus of his mind, and the peace in his heart all had to be in harmony. One evening, after a long day of practice, Rikyū sat alone by the garden pond, reflecting on the lessons Ju had imparted. The air was cool, and the light of the moon shimmered on the water. Rikyū's thoughts drifted to the Zen teachings he had learned. He remembered the old Zen verse he had heard so many times, one that had been a constant companion on his journey. The moon's reflection on the water, a fleeting moment in time, yet the ripples of the water carry its light forever. Rikyū repeated the poem softly to himself, his eyes fixed on the ripples on the pond. The moon, like life, is fleeting, but the ripples, the effects of our actions, carry on long after the moment has passed. He smiled, the simple beauty of the verse grounding him in the present moment. As Rikyū's understanding of tea deepened, so did his understanding of life itself. Tea became a practice of mindfulness, a way to see the world through different eyes. It was about accepting imperfection, about understanding the impermanence of all things. In the preparation of tea, Rikyū learned to accept the fleeting nature of each moment, to embrace the beauty that existed even in the smallest, most imperfect things. Joe's teachings shaped not just Rikyū's approach to tea, but his entire approach to life. He came to see the tea ceremony as a metaphor for the way one should live, with mindfulness, with grace, and with acceptance of the imperfections of the world. In those quiet, humble moments of tea preparation, Rikyū found the answers he had been searching for. He understood, for the first time, that tea was not just about making a perfect cup of tea. It was about making peace with the world, making peace with life's imperfections, and finding beauty in the simplicity of every moment. Rikyū's life, once shaped by the simple, meditative practice of tea, began to intersect with the world of politics, power, and ambition. He had been content to practice tea as a way of finding peace and connecting with the world on a spiritual level. But the winds of change were blowing, and the world he had known, quiet and still, was about to be swept up into a new era, an era defined by war, conquest, and the struggle for power. This was the time of the Sengoku period, when warlords fought to control Japan, and Rikyū's life would be forever altered by the forces of these powerful men. One day, Rikyū was summoned to the court of Oda Nobunaga, one of the most powerful warlords of the time. Nobunaga, whose ambition burned as fiercely as the flames of war he often ignited, was in the process of consolidating power across Japan. His reputation as a ruthless and strategic leader was already well established, but it was his taste for culture and refinement that led him to Rikyū. Rikyū had heard of Nobunaga. Of course, he had heard of his campaigns, his iron will, and his drive to unify Japan under his rule. But Nobunaga's interest in tea was something Rikyū had not expected. To a warlord like Nobunaga, tea would have seemed like a luxury, an art form meant for the elite, far removed from the battlefield. Yet it was precisely this art form, in its subtlety and refinement, that drew Nobunaga's attention. "It is not just the tea, is it, master?" Nobunaga asked when he first met Rikyū. The warlord, sitting on a low wooden seat, surveyed Rikyū with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "It is not simply about the drink or the ceremony. There is something deeper in it." Rikyū, who had long been accustomed to the simplicity of his tea practice, felt the weight of Nobunaga's gaze. There was no hint of mockery in his voice, no pretense. It was the voice of a man who understood that power and prestige were never just about military victories, but about how those victories were perceived. "Yes, my lord," Rikyū replied, his voice steady, though his mind was alight with the unspoken implications of the question. Tea is not just a drink, nor a luxury. It is a reflection of the mind, the spirit, and the world. And tea had always been a spiritual practice for Rikyū, but now he found himself at a crossroads. Nobunaga's interest in tea went beyond the ritual. He recognized its power as a political tool, a subtle instrument of influence that could elevate his status and solidify his connections. Tea, for Nobunaga, was not just about sipping a beverage. It was about creating an atmosphere of refinement and control, a way to showcase his dominance over the elite of Japan. In the world of warlords, power is not only displayed on the battlefield, Nobunaga said as he watched Rikyū prepare tea, his voice low but sharp, like the blade of a sword. It must also be displayed in the things we choose to surround ourselves with. This tea, it is more than luxury. It is a mark of status. The words struck Rikyū deeply, and he began to realize the profound implications of tea in the context of the warlord culture. It wasn't just about beauty, serenity, or spiritual peace anymore. Tea had evolved into a symbol of power, and those who could master it like Rikyū held the potential to influence the tides of political and social power. The ceremonies that Rikyū performed for Nobunaga grew in significance. They were no longer just an exchange of tea. They became elaborate performances, moments where political alliances were subtly formed, and subtle messages were conveyed without a single word being spoken. Tea became a way to strengthen alliances and to send silent messages, just as much as it was about inner peace. One day, as Rikyū prepared tea for Nobunaga, the warlord remarked, "Do you see, Master Rikyū? The warriors and generals speak of their victories on the battlefield, but here, in your tea room, we speak of something greater. We speak of unity, of purpose, of culture. With tea, I hold my power not just in the hands of my soldiers, but in the hearts of those who drink." And Rikyū, though humble and contemplative by nature, understood the depths of Nobunaga's words. In a world where power was often held by the sword, tea offered a new, subtler way to maintain influence. "My lord," he replied, his hands steady as he poured the tea with care, "tea is a bridge. It connects people, creates understanding where there was none before, but it is only as powerful as the hand that serves it." Rikyū's role in Nobunaga's court grew. He was no longer just a tea master. He was a key figure in a grand political network, helping to elevate Nobunaga's status and influence among the samurai elite. Tea ceremonies became a platform for warlord politics, and Rikyū became a symbol of refinement, an embodiment of the warlord's ability to unite power and culture. Yet, as his influence grew, so did the danger. Tea was no longer simply a private affair. It was a stage on which battles were fought not with swords, but with subtle gestures, with the careful balance of power, prestige, and influence. And Rikyū was caught in the middle, his mastery of tea now interwoven with the lives of the most powerful men in Japan. Rikyū's role was not just about serving tea, but about creating the very atmosphere in which the warlords lived and worked. The tea ceremonies were where the most powerful alliances were formed. They were where men of great influence came together, not to speak of battle plans, but to share a moment of calm amidst the chaos. Rikyū's tea ceremonies became the stage for power plays, subtle and silent, where silence was just as important as the words spoken. A man's true strength is not in his sword, but in his ability to move the hearts of others, Rikyū would often say, quoting the wisdom of Zen. And as he prepared the tea, he saw that the hearts of the men around him were often more easily moved by the simplicity of tea than by any amount of gold or land. Tea, however, was not just a weapon of politics. It was a path to spiritual alignment and self-mastery. Through each delicate movement, each step of the tea ceremony, Rikyū was reminded of the Zen teachings that had shaped his philosophy. As he poured the tea for the great warlord Nobunaga, he thought of the Zen poem his master had taught him. The way of tea is the way of life. It is in the stillness that we find true strength. To sip from the bowl is to sip from life itself, and in that sip, we taste all that is fleeting and eternal. Rikyū did not simply serve tea to warlords and generals. Through each bowl of tea, he invited them into a deeper understanding of the impermanence of all things, the fleeting nature of power, the beauty in simplicity. In every moment, every gesture, he hoped that those who partook in the tea would feel the quiet hum of something greater than their ambition. It was this quiet grace, this humility, that became his hallmark even as he worked among the powerful. Thus, Rikyū's influence grew, both in the world of politics and in the tea ceremonies he presided over. What started as a practice of simplicity had become a powerful tool, one that could unite men as easily as it could divide them. Tea, once a peaceful art, had become a quiet battlefield, and Rikyū, the master of it, found himself at the heart of a world where silence spoke louder than swords, and tea was the most dangerous weapon of all. Sen no Rikyū's quiet life as a humble tea master was now being shaped by forces far greater than he could have anticipated. His connection to the powerful warlords Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi had thrust him into the center of Japan's political and cultural elite. What had begun as a simple, spiritual practice of tea had transformed into a symbol of status and power. And as Rikyū's reputation spread, he became not just a tea master, but a cultural icon, a figure whose influence reached far beyond the tea room. Rikyū had never sought fame. He had never desired wealth, nor the trappings of power. His life had been one of humility, simplicity, and spiritual depth. But as he continued to serve tea to the most powerful men in Japan, his name began to echo through the court of Oda Nobunaga, and later, the rising star of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. It was in Nobunaga's court that Rikyū's influence began to grow. The warlord, who had been captivated by the spiritual depth of Rikyū's tea ceremonies, soon began to rely on him for more than just tea. Nobunaga, with his keen eye for cultural prestige, saw that tea could be more than a luxurious pastime. It could be a statement. It could be a way of asserting his power, not just on the battlefield, but in the court as well. But Rikyū, ever humble, had never seen himself as a tool of political ambition. He was, after all, simply a man of tea. Yet, in the midst of the chaos and power struggles that surrounded Nobunaga's reign, Rikyū's tea ceremonies became something of a sanctuary, a place where even the fiercest warlords could find a moment of peace and reflection. It was here that Rikyū's genius truly began to shine. One morning, as Rikyū entered Nobunaga's court, he was greeted by the warlord himself, who was eager to see the changes Rikyū had promised to bring to the tea ceremony. The tension in the air was palpable. Nobunaga had long been a figure of force, power, and authority, and his court was no different. But in the quiet of the tea room, where Rikyū had been invited to prepare the tea, there was a different kind of energy, one that had the power to transcend the political drama outside. "Master Rikyū," Nobunaga said, his voice low but filled with anticipation, "today you will perform a ceremony like no other. I trust you will make it one worthy of my court." Rikyū, who had learned long ago not to speak more than necessary, nodded and took his place before the waiting guests. The ceremony began in silence, as it always did. His hands moved gracefully, deliberately, and with deep focus, each motion part of a greater whole. But as Rikyū prepared the tea, it became clear that this ceremony would be unlike any other. Tea is not just about the drink, Rikyū had once told Nobunaga in private, his voice filled with conviction. It is about creating a space, a sacred space, where all distractions fall away and only the moment remains. It is in that stillness that we find truth. And that, in essence, was what Rikyū did in his ceremonies. He didn't simply prepare tea. He created an environment of reflection, a brief yet profound escape from the machinations of war and politics. In each movement, In each pour, he invited those who participated to leave behind their titles, their ambition, and their strife. They were, for a fleeting moment, simply human beings sharing a bowl of tea. The guests in the room, generals, courtiers, and influential men, sat in quiet reverence as Rikyū completed the ceremony. The air was thick with the weight of his words and actions. Nobunaga, who had always prided himself on his strength and command, found himself humbled. The elegance of the tea ceremony, with its graceful simplicity, was a stark contrast to the violent world he had spent his life shaping. That day, Rikyū's ceremony wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. The guests, including Nobunaga, felt something they hadn't anticipated: peace. A moment of quiet amidst their lives of turmoil. It was in this space that Rikyū's fame grew. His tea ceremonies became not only a political tool but a cultural phenomenon. The world outside may be full of noise, Rikyū thought as he cleaned the tea utensils after the ceremony. But here, in this room, we find clarity. It was a clarity that Nobunaga recognized. He saw that Rikyū was not just a tea master. He was an artist who understood how to create meaning in the most simple of acts. Tea, he realized, was a tool of influence, a way to shape the very atmosphere of the court. "Master Rikyū," Nobunaga said quietly after the ceremony, his voice laced with genuine respect. "Your tea is not just for pleasure, it is for power." Rikyū, ever humble, simply bowed, his heart unmoved by flattery. "Tea," he replied, "is not for power, my lord. It is for presence, for peace." But Nobunaga's words had weight, and from that day forward, Rikyū's fame spread. It wasn't long before Nobunaga's court began to adopt Rikyū's approach to tea as their own. The once simple ceremonies became elaborate affairs, where the act of sharing tea was a display of culture and refinement. Rikyū's influence extended beyond tea itself. His approach to creating a sacred space for reflection became a cultural statement, a way of bringing dignity to the sometimes brutal world of the warlords. As Nobunaga's influence grew, so did Rikyū's. But it wasn't just Nobunaga who recognized the value of tea. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who succeeded Nobunaga after his death, saw Rikyū's power and influence in a different light. Hideyoshi, though also a warlord, was a man of different tastes. He understood the political power of tea, but he also understood its spiritual significance. Like Nobunaga, he saw how Rikyū's tea ceremonies could reflect his own rise to power. But unlike his predecessor, Hideyoshi was also drawn to the quiet, meditative aspects of the tea. "Master Rikyū," Hideyoshi said when he first invited Rikyū to perform at his court, "I have heard much of your tea ceremonies. I wish to see for myself what all the talk is about." End quote. Rikyū, ever poised, prepared the tea once more. He had learned to be patient with his masters, to serve them without ever being swept up in their ambitions. His role was simple: to create a space where the soul could rest even for a brief moment in the midst of the storm. And so he did. And as Hideyoshi sipped the tea, he too understood. He saw that the power of tea was not just in its taste, but in its ability to transform the moment, to quiet the chaos, and to bring the heart back to a place of peace. With both Nobunaga and Hideyoshi's patronage, Rikyū's fame skyrocketed. He had become more than just a tea master. He had become a symbol of cultural refinement, a figure who embodied the grace of simplicity and the profundity of stillness. Through his tea ceremonies, he had elevated the act of drinking tea into something sacred, something that transcended the physical world and touched upon the spiritual. In the elegant simplicity of his tea, Rikyū had found a way to shape the very fabric of culture, and through his humble service, he had woven himself into the tapestry of history. His reputation as a master of both tea and culture spread far beyond the courts of Nobunaga and Hideyoshi. Rikyū's name became synonymous with refinement, grace, and power. Not the power of force, but the power of presence. Tea, Rikyū thought to himself as he sat alone in his tea room late one evening, is not about what we hold in our hands, it is about what we hold in our hearts. As he sipped his tea, the warm liquid sliding over his tongue, he realized that his journey had taken him far beyond the simple path of a tea master. He had become part of something greater. Tea had changed him, and he had changed the world with it. Rikyū's rise to fame was not one of ambition or conquest. It was the rise of a simple man whose life was shaped not by the sword, but by the quiet, deliberate act of serving tea. And in the stillness of his tea room, he had found a way to influence the course of history, not through power, but through peace. After the tumultuous death of Oda Nobunaga, the landscape of Japan changed dramatically. The Sengoku period was in full swing, and the struggle for power was fiercer than ever. Amidst the chaos, Toyotomi Hideyoshi emerged as the unlikely successor to Nobunaga's ambitions. A man born of humble origins, Hideyoshi's rise to power was both extraordinary and symbolic of Japan's shifting tides. Where Nobunaga had ruled with the strength of a sword, Hideyoshi wielded not just military power, but an understanding of the importance of culture, symbolism, and mindful presentation. This made him the perfect patron for Rikyū, the tea master who understood that true influence was often exercised not on the battlefield, but in the quiet, intimate spaces of the soul. Rikyū's life, once defined by his personal spiritual journey with tea, had now become intertwined with the political currents of the time. His first meeting with Hideyoshi had been marked by the warlord's curiosity. But as their relationship deepened, it became clear that Hideyoshi saw Rikyū not just as a tea master, but as a symbol of cultural prestige, a man who could elevate his image among the samurai elite. "Master Rikyū," Hideyoshi's voice rang out one evening in the grand hall where his courtiers had gathered. The warlord had been watching as Rikyū prepared a delicate cup of tea. He observed the movements of the tea master with the same focus he once gave his military campaigns. "You have done much for my court. But tell me," he paused, studying Rikyū intently, "what is the true value of tea?" Rikyū, who had always approached his art with humility, took a moment before responding. His hands, though steady, moved slowly as he continued the ritual of preparing tea. The tension of the court seemed to melt away with each precise motion. "Tea," Rikyū replied, his voice soft but filled with quiet authority, "is not simply a beverage. It is a reflection of life. It is the beauty of simplicity, the peace that comes from embracing imperfection, and the wisdom found in patience. But most of all, it is a means of connection. It brings people together, not through words, but through presence. Hideyoshi listened intently, sensing the deeper meaning of Rikyū's words. This was not merely about drinking tea. This was about the space created, the moment of stillness it provided amidst the turmoil of power and war. In the years that followed, Hideyoshi's patronage of Rikyū grew stronger. Hideyoshi, though a man of immense power, was keenly aware of the importance of culture in shaping his image and consolidating his power. Tea ceremonies, under Rikyū's direction, became much more than just private gatherings. They became status symbols, an essential part of the lifestyle of the samurai elite. In the presence of tea, warriors shed their swords and ceased their battles, if only for a moment. The formality of the tea ceremony became a way for Hideyoshi's inner circle to demonstrate their loyalty, not through the clashing of blades, but through the refinement of spirit. Tea became the medium through which their status was reinforced. It was no longer just about the taste of tea, but about prestige, about reflection, about creating a space for nobility and power to be simultaneously displayed and humbled. One afternoon, as the tea house doors opened to reveal the magnificence of the garden in full bloom, Hideyoshi himself arrived for one of Rikyū's most elaborate tea ceremonies. This was no ordinary gathering. The warlord had invited several of his most trusted samurai to join him, a display of political unity and power in the form of tea. As Rikyū arranged the tea utensils with perfect precision, Hideyoshi observed, his gaze filled with a mixture of admiration and reverence. I have seen men march to battle, swords raised high, but never have I seen such an army in this room, he mused, watching as his samurai took their places, waiting for the ceremony to begin. This is the true strength of a leader, to command loyalty not just with power, but with culture. Rikyū, ever humble, bowed his head slightly. It is the way of tea, my lord, to find strength not in force, but in harmony, to unite not with weapons, but with hearts open to the present moment. The moment was fleeting, but in it, something deep and significant occurred. Tea had become more than just a practice. It had woven itself into the very fabric of Hideyoshi's court, becoming a political tool as much as a spiritual one. To serve tea to the most powerful men in Japan was not just an honor, it was a statement of control, of unity, and of the ability to command presence without uttering a single word. Rikyū's ceremonies became legendary not only because of their spiritual depth, but because they embodied power in a form that was both visible and subtle. The warlords, the samurai, and the nobles who gathered around the tea bowl felt as though they were not just drinking tea, they were drinking from the very well of Hideyoshi's power, his ambition, and his culture. They sipped from that bowl and understood that they were part of something greater than themselves, something timeless. As Hideyoshi's power grew, so did Rikyū's fame. His name became synonymous with refinement, with prestige, and with symbolic power. He had achieved something that very few could. His role in the court was no longer just that of a tea master. He was now an advisor of sorts, a cultural figure whose influence stretched beyond the tea room and into the heart of the samurai way of life. In the midst of all this, Rikyū remained as calm as ever, his heart still attuned to the Zen principles that had shaped his understanding of tea. To serve tea is to serve life, he often said to his disciples, his eyes serene, his hands steady. It is a way to understand the world, to honor the present, and to accept that all things are transient. Rikyū had become the soul of the tea ceremony, and as his fame spread, it became clear that his role was no longer confined to the private world of his spiritual practice. Tea had transformed from an act of personal peace into an instrument of power. Hideyoshi, the warlord who had once fought his way to the top, now found himself sitting in Rikyū's tea room, seeking peace, seeking unity, and seeking a way to elevate himself above the battlefield, to show that a leader's strength could be seen not only in battle, but in culture and grace. One evening, after the tea ceremony had concluded, Hideyoshi stood on the porch, looking out at the garden, his eyes filled with a thoughtful intensity. He turned to Rikyū, who had joined him quietly. "Master Rikyū," Hideyoshi said, his voice low and contemplative, "you have shown me that strength is not always in the sword, but in the quiet, in the way we treat those around us. In tea, I have found a power I never imagined." Rikyū, who had never been one to claim ownership over his teachings, smiled softly and replied, "Power, my lord, is in how we move through the world. In tea, we learn to move with grace, to be present with others, and to find peace even in the most turbulent of times." And so, as the evening light faded and the garden was bathed in the gentle glow of the lanterns, Rikyū felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His influence had spread, and he had witnessed the transformation of tea from a humble practice into a cultural symbol that could shape the destiny of the nation. Yet, in his heart, he knew that true mastery was not in power, not in prestige, but in humility. In the end, it was not the tea ceremonies he performed for the warlords or the nobility that would define his legacy, but the peace they brought to those who partook, a peace that transcended the chaos of the world. Rikyū's bond with Hideyoshi grew as the warlord's influence continued to spread across Japan. But tea, now more than ever, was not just about the simplicity of the ceremony. It was about the profound power that lay in the subtlety of the practice, a power that unified, refined, and ultimately shaped the destiny of the Japanese elite. Senno Rikyū had always lived with a certain sense of simplicity. The deeper he delved into the world of tea, the more he saw that true elegance was not found in opulence or the finely polished, but in the humble and imperfect. He had grown up surrounded by the bustling, ever-changing world of commerce, and it was this experience that gave him the perspective to see the impermanence in everything. It was not about perfection, but about embracing the fleeting nature of life. His time spent in the quiet tea room had led him to Zen, a path of acceptance, of embracing simplicity and finding beauty in imperfection. Rikyū knew that the practice of tea was not just about creating a ceremonial beverage. It was a way of life, a way of seeing the world, and a way of connecting with the deepest truths of existence. And so, it was in the creation of the wabi-sabi aesthetic that he found a means to revolutionize tea, not just in its practice, but in the very soul of the ceremony. One evening, as Rikyū sat alone in the garden, His mind wandered back to the days when he first met Takunoju, his Zen master. The simplicity of the tea room Ju had crafted had left a lasting impression on him. It was a space without adornment, stripped of all that was unnecessary, and in that space, Rikyū began to understand. True beauty came not from what was added, but from what was taken away. The more he reflected on this, the more he realized that wabi-sabi was not a philosophy simply about creating beauty from simplicity. It was about finding peace in imperfection and embracing the transience of life, accepting that nothing is forever, and that in its fleeting moments, life was infinitely precious. The beauty of a fallen leaf, Rikyū said one day, as he examined a fallen branch from a nearby tree, is that it will never return, but in its brief life, it has contributed to the whole of the world. The cracks in a bowl, are they not as beautiful as the whole? For they carry the story of time. As the seasons changed, so did Rikyū's understanding of tea. He began to redefine the elements of the tea ceremony itself. The tea room, the space in which the ceremony took place, had long been the realm of decoration and elaborate design. Yet Rikyū saw that the tea room, like life itself, should be unadorned, simple, and humble. He began to strip away the extravagance of silk scrolls and rich fabrics and replace them with natural elements. A single branch, he would say, can speak more to the soul than all the precious silks in the world. Rikyū's design for the tea room became a revolution in simplicity. Instead of rich tapestries, he favored bare walls that were occasionally adorned with simple calligraphy or a single flower. Bamboo, stone, and clay materials that had been around since the beginning of time became his preferred choices for decoration. The tatami mats were laid flat, without the fine embroidery that had once marked the homes of the elite. When Rikyū's disciples questioned his approach, wondering why the rooms seemed so stripped down, he would smile and say, "The room is not for showing, it is for being. It is for breathing with the earth, the air, the sky. The simplicity of the space makes room for the soul." But it wasn't just the space that needed transformation, it was the utensils themselves. Before Rikyū, the tea bowls, the whisk, the tea scoop were often beautifully decorated with intricate designs, often gilded with gold and painted with elaborate scenes. Yet, as his mind became increasingly aligned with Zen, Rikyū saw that the utensils, like the room, must be reflective of the impermanent nature of all things. He began to seek out tea bowls that were not smooth, flawless works of art, but rough, unglazed pieces of clay. He chose bowls that had small cracks and imperfections in them, bowls that had been shaped by the hands of humble artisans. The whisks became simpler, no longer gilded or lacquered, but made of bamboo in its most natural state, weathered by time and use. He wanted the utensils to reflect the truth of their being, not hiding their flaws but celebrating them. A bowl is not defined by its perfection, he once said to a disciple, as they admired a new bowl he had selected. It is the wear of time that gives it meaning. The cracks are not imperfections, they are part of the beauty. It is the same with us. One evening, as Rikyū prepared tea for a gathering of nobles and samurai, he selected a rough clay bowl, its surface uneven and marked with the slight imperfections of the firing process. As the guests arrived and sat, their eyes were immediately drawn to the bowl. its plainness in stark contrast to the finely decorated ceramics they were accustomed to. "Master Rikyū," one of the samurai remarked, unable to hide his surprise, "is this truly the bowl you have chosen for us?" Rikyū, without a hint of hesitation, nodded. "Yes. This bowl is no less worthy of the tea than any other. Its shape is like our lives, imperfect, yes, but filled with purpose. It holds the tea just as we hold our lives despite the cracks." The guests, at first uncomfortable with the simplicity, soon found themselves drawn into the beauty of the moment. As the tea was poured and the warmth of the liquid spread through the bowl, they began to see not just the imperfections in the bowl, but the beauty that lay in the very presence of the moment, the warm connection between themselves, the tea, and the humble bowl before them. Rikyū's tea ceremonies became something more profound than mere gatherings. They became sacred spaces where the beauty of imperfection was embraced. The tea ceremony itself was no longer just about preparing tea, but about preparing the mind, about accepting that life was fleeting, that nothing was permanent, and that in the simplicity of this truth there was great beauty. Rikyū's influence began to spread throughout the samurai elite, who were drawn not just to the prestige of the tea ceremony, but to its philosophical depth. In a world consumed by war and ambition, Rikyū's tea ceremonies offered a rare moment of peace, of reflection, and of acceptance. The warlords, who had been accustomed to wielding their power through force, began to see the true power of presence and humility. One evening, as the cherry blossoms began to bloom in the courtyard, Rikyū sat in quiet contemplation, watching the petals fall from the trees. "The cherry blossom falls," he whispered to himself, "and in its fall it is perfect, not because it is whole, but because it is fleeting. That is the beauty of life. That is the beauty of tea." The truth of these words settled deeply within him. He understood now that tea, like life, was not about perfection. It was about the moment, about being present with what is, and accepting the impermanence of it all. The wabi-sabi aesthetic, which Rikyū had nurtured in the tea room, was now beginning to flourish in the world outside. His influence extended far beyond tea. It began to shape the very culture of Japan. The nobility and samurai no longer saw beauty in the luxurious and the extravagant, but in the simple, the natural, and the impermanent. Tea had transcended its role as a drink and had become a philosophy, a way of life, a way to embrace the fleeting beauty of every moment. The years following Nobunaga's death had brought a strange peace to Japan, a peace won through war and bloodshed. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who had risen from humble beginnings, now held the reins of power. But the weight of his rule was not just found in the vast territories he commanded, or the loyal samurai who followed him, but in the constant fear of losing it all. In his quest to unify Japan, Hideyoshi had become increasingly paranoid, unable to trust even those who had helped him rise to power. At first, Rikyū had been nothing more than a simple tea master, a quiet companion who provided solace and meaning to the warlord through the meditative act of tea. But as Hideyoshi's power grew, so too did his sense of vulnerability. The tea ceremonies, once a space for reflection, had become more than just a ritual of peace. They were now an arena for power, a delicate dance between loyalty and influence. Rikyū had long been accustomed to his role as Hideyoshi's spiritual guide, offering him peace in a world constantly shaped by the din of battle and political scheming. But the more his influence in the court grew, the more suspicion began to surround him. One day, Hideyoshi invited him to the inner chambers of his palace, far from the ceremonial tea rooms where they had met before. Rikyū had sensed the shift in the air long before entering. The palace was quiet, but the silence felt heavy with unspoken tension. Hideyoshi stood by a window, staring out at the vast horizon, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "Master Rikyū," Hideyoshi said, his voice quieter than usual, the warmth in his tone replaced by something more calculated. "Tea has always been a refuge for me, a place to find clarity. But lately, it has become something more, something I can no longer control." Rikyū stood in the doorway, his heart sinking as he sensed what was coming. This was no longer just a conversation about tea. This was about power. "My lord," Rikyū said softly, taking his place in the room. He carefully set the tea bowl before him, but his hands trembled ever so slightly. "Tea has never been something that can be controlled. It is a mirror, reflecting the true nature of the heart. It does not favor one or another." Hideyoshi turned slowly, his eyes dark, with an unease that Rikyū had never seen before. "A mirror," he muttered, his voice hardening. "Perhaps, but mirrors can reflect more than we wish to see. And the heart, Master Rikyū, is often the most dangerous thing to trust. The power of tea has begun to slip through my fingers, and it worries me. It worries me greatly." Rikyū took a deep breath, the weight of his lord's words settling on his chest. Hideyoshi had trusted him once, perhaps more than anyone else. But now, in the quiet of the room, he realized that his tea, his influence, had become something that both united and divided. Rikyū had never asked for power. He had never sought to be a player in the dangerous game of court politics. But the more he had guided the powerful through the tea ceremony, the more he had become entangled in their lives. The irony of it all struck Rikyū sharply. A practice that was meant to bring peace had become a tool for subtle manipulation, and he, a man of simplicity, was caught at the center of it all. "My lord," Rikyū replied, choosing his words carefully, "tea does not seek to control. It seeks to reveal. In its simplicity, it uncovers the hidden thoughts and intentions of the heart." Hideyoshi clenched his fists, a rare sign of agitation. "And what if those thoughts and intentions are not in my favor, Master Rikyū?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that could break stone. "What if my own men begin to use your tea to plot against me? I cannot afford to show weakness, not even in the tea room." The words hit Rikyū like a blow. A weapon, that was how Hideyoshi saw it now. Tea had become a subtle weapon, an instrument of power that was slipping out of his grasp. Rikyū's mind raced, yet his expression remained calm. He placed his hands together, palms pressed gently, and spoke softly. "Tea, my lord, does not take sides. It is not the vessel that shapes the soul, but the soul that shapes the vessel. If there is deceit within the hearts of your men, it will be reflected in their actions, whether they drink tea or not." Hideyoshi's eyes darkened. "You speak of hearts and souls, Master Rikyū. But in this court, The only thing that matters is loyalty, and I am beginning to question where the true loyalties lie." Rikyū bowed his head, understanding the deeper implication of Hideyoshi's words. Loyalty. It had always been the cornerstone of samurai culture, the very foundation upon which the Toyotomi rule rested. But as the political winds shifted, the bonds of loyalty had become as fragile as the porcelain bowls in Rikyū's hands. In the years of war and conquest, Hideyoshi had known only one law: survival. And in the courts of warlords, survival could only be ensured through control of both men and emotions. As the conversation turned to darker topics, Rikyū retreated into his thoughts. He had once believed that tea could transcend politics, that in its stillness, it could offer respite from the chaos of the world. But now he understood that the stillness he had cherished had become a mirror, reflecting not just peace, but the underlying currents of power, fear, and ambition. As the evening wore on, Hideyoshi's paranoia deepened. The cracks in his resolve had begun to show. He began to ask Rikyū more pointed questions about the loyalties of those around him, about the subtle influence that tea had over the samurai who had come to his court. "Do you not see, Master Rikyū?" Hideyoshi asked quietly, almost to himself, "that the same tea that binds us can also tear us apart? I see it now, in every cup." And Rikyū could see the weight of the warlord's mind turning inward, his paranoia clouding his judgment. Tea, once a tool of peace, had become something more dangerous in Hideyoshi's eyes, a mirror of distrust. Rikyū had once believed in the power of tea to bring clarity, but in this moment, he realized that clarity could be a double-edged sword. Later that evening, Rikyū returned to his own room, alone with his thoughts. He stared at the tea bowl in his hands, the delicate cracks in the porcelain. For a moment, the tea bowl seemed to mirror his own fractured soul, a symbol of both beauty and fragility. His heart was heavy, with the growing tension between loyalty to his lord and the dangerous political games now being played. As he gazed at the reflection of the flickering candlelight in the bowl, the words of a Zen poem came to him. The moon's reflection in a still pond, silent, calm, and clear. But the moon cannot stay forever, and the water, though still, cannot be held. The moon, like the loyalty of men, was fleeting. The water, like the calm that came with tea, was transient. And in the stillness, Rikyū realized that his role in the court had changed. He was no longer just a tea master. He had become part of the political landscape, part of the game of power. He had always believed in the peace tea brought, but now he felt the weight of its power. The tea that once symbolized humility and spirituality had become entangled in a world of deceit and paranoia. The questions that Hideyoshi had posed to him about loyalty, about power, echoed in his mind. Was tea now a tool for survival? A weapon instead of a path to enlightenment? The bond between Rikyū and Hideyoshi had always been one of respect, but now it had begun to fray at the edges. Rikyū had been a spiritual guide to Hideyoshi, but now he found himself caught between loyalty and survival. The purity of his tea, once his sanctuary, now felt burdened by the political intrigues that surrounded him. In the stillness of his tea room, Rikyū could no longer ignore the truth that had begun to settle like dust in the corners of his mind. His role in the court was no longer simply to serve tea, but to navigate the shadows of power and paranoia. Tea, once a tool for peace, had become a reflection of the very chaos he had always sought to transcend. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows over the tea room, a space that had once been a sanctuary for peace and reflection. Now, the air in the room was thick with tension, an almost palpable weight of betrayal that had silently crept into the fragile relationship between Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Sen no Rikyū. Once, they had shared a bond forged through tea, a quiet understanding of the world's fragility. But now, that bond had cracked, leaving only the ruins of what had once been a harmonious union. It had been a long time since Rikyū had felt the same peace in his heart as he had during those early days of his service to Hideyoshi. Their relationship had always been based on mutual respect. Hideyoshi, for all his ambition and desire for power, had always seen something beyond the political and military world in Rikyū. The tea master had brought him not just refinement but spirituality, a momentary respite from the ruthless pursuit of conquest and control. Tea had, for a while, been the bridge between them, a sacred ritual in which Hideyoshi could find the stillness that eluded him in his political battles. But as Hideyoshi's power grew, so did his insecurities. The very strength that had brought him to the peak of power had also made him vulnerable. Paranoia gnawed at him, eroding his trust in those around him. What had once been a loyal relationship between lord and servant had started to fray, and Rikyū, who had once stood as the spiritual guide and humble servant, now seemed to represent something dangerous, something that threatened the very foundation of Hideyoshi's rule. The seeds of doubt were planted in Rikyū's heart one fateful evening when Hideyoshi summoned him to his chambers for what seemed like an ordinary tea ceremony. But this was not a ceremony of quiet reflection. It was a moment filled with accusations and hostility. The warlord, now consumed with suspicion, had begun to see Rikyū's influence as a threat, a reminder of the power that lay beyond the sword and the military. "Master Rikyū," Hideyoshi began, his voice betraying an edge he had not used before. "I have been hearing whispers that suggest you have begun to show disrespect to my authority. You have grown too close to the other warlords. Your influence is too great. It is no longer just tea that you serve. It is something far more dangerous." Rikyū stood motionless before him, his heart heavy with the weight of his lord's words. He had always known that tea, once a humble practice, had become something more, a symbol of status, power, and subtle influence. But he had never used it as a weapon. It was a means of reflection, of peace, not a tool of political maneuvering. "My lord," Rikyū said softly, his voice steady, but his heart aching, "I have never sought power through tea. Tea is a practice of peace, not of conquest. My only desire has been to serve you, to help you find clarity in this chaotic world. I would never disrespect you." But Hideyoshi, his face twisted with distrust, was no longer listening to reason. His paranoia had completely overtaken him. In his eyes, Rikyū was no longer a spiritual guide, he was a rival, someone who wielded influence in ways that could threaten the very foundation of his power. "You speak of peace," But I see only manipulation, Hideyoshi spat, his voice rising with anger. I trusted you, Rikyū, but now I see that your tea has poisoned my court. You have played your part in this theater of influence, and now it's time to end it. The words struck Rikyū like a thunderbolt. He had been loyal to Hideyoshi for years, serving him with humility and devotion. Yet now his loyalty was being called into question. The irony was not lost on him. It was tea, the very thing that had brought them together, that was now the catalyst for his downfall. My lord, please, Rikyū began, but Hideyoshi silenced him with a raised hand. Enough, Hideyoshi shouted, his eyes wild with suspicion. You will show no more respect. You will leave this court, or you will face the consequences. Rikyū's heart sank. He had never imagined that this day would come, that his humble practice, which had once been a bridge between two men, would now be the cause of his demise. Hideyoshi, his expression hard as stone, turned to his guards. Master Rikyū, he said coldly, you are no longer welcome here. Leave or face the consequences of your actions. The tea master bowed his head, the weight of betrayal crushing his spirit. The very man he had served, the man he had helped find moments of stillness and peace, had now turned against him. In the end, tea, the very thing that had united them, had become the weapon that separated them. In the days that followed, Rikyū's fate was sealed. Despite his loyalty, despite his years of service, Hideyoshi's paranoia and fear consumed him. Rikyū was accused of disrespecting the warlord's authority, and, in a tragic turn, Hideyoshi ordered Rikyū to commit seppuku, the ritual suicide that was demanded of those who had dishonored their lord. The news spread quickly throughout the court. The samurai who had once revered Rikyū as a spiritual guide now looked upon him with distrust. The tea ceremonies that had once been a symbol of unity had now become tainted by political intrigue. Tea, which had once been a means to foster connection, had now become a symbol of the fragility of power. On the night before his death, Rikyū sat in his small tea room, the tea bowl before him. The moonlight filtered through the shoji screen, casting soft shadows on the tatami mats. He had always known that life was fleeting, that nothing was permanent. And yet, facing the end of his life, he found himself overcome by an overwhelming sense of regret, not for his actions, but for the way in which his bond with Hideyoshi had ended. In this fleeting moment, I have found the peace I sought, but not in the way I imagined, he whispered to himself, his fingers gently caressing the cracked surface of the tea bowl. I have lived for simplicity, for the beauty of imperfection, but now I see that life itself is as fragile as the bowl before me. One small crack, one small flaw, and everything falls apart. As he prepared for the final act, Rikyū recited a Zen verse that had long been a companion on his journey. The flower blooms, and in its bloom it fades. The moon rises, and in its rise it sets. So, too, does life bloom and fade, but in its fading, it finds peace. In the early morning light, Rikyū took his life, as ordered by Hideyoshi. His death marked the tragic end of a man whose loyalty, humility, and peace had once bridged the gap between two worlds. His passing became a symbol of the fragility of power and art, a symbol of how the world of politics and culture could so easily collide, leaving only ruin in their wake. Rikyū's death reverberated through the entire court and beyond. The warlord's hands, stained by suspicion and fear, had sealed the fate of a man who had once brought peace to his world. Tea, which had once been a medium of calm and clarity, had now become a weapon in a political game. Rikyū's passing became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragile balance between loyalty and power, between the art of tea and the machinations of the elite. Tea was never meant to be a tool of power, Rikyū had often said. It is a path to stillness, to wisdom, to peace. And yet, in his final moments, Rikyū understood a profound truth. Tea, like life, was fleeting. It could be a source of clarity or a reflection of chaos, depending on the hands that held it. The sun had set on the life of Sen-no Rikyū, but his legacy remained a steady and enduring light in the hearts of those who had known him. His death, ordered by Hideyoshi, left a mark on the world of tea and Japanese culture that could not easily be erased. Though he had lived a life of humility and simplicity, Rikyū's passing sent ripples through time, reverberating in the tea communities, through the samurai courts, and across the cultural landscape of Japan. In the immediate aftermath of his death, whispers of his tragic fate swept through the court and beyond. Many who had admired him now mourned his loss, and the impact of his philosophy was immediately felt. Tea ceremonies, once simple expressions of peace and contemplation, were now imbued with a new depth of meaning. The spirit of Rikyū, his quiet humility, and his wabi-sabi aesthetic, his embrace of imperfection and simplicity, continued to shape the way tea was practiced, passed down from teacher to student, from generation to generation. But even more than this, Rikyū's death signaled the end of an era. His teachings were not bound by a specific time or place. The influence he had on Japanese culture transcended the tea ceremony itself. It was evident in the very fabric of the way people viewed art, architecture, and the world around them. Rikyū had reshaped the cultural landscape of Japan, not by force, but by presenting a philosophy rooted in simplicity and grace. His life had been one of quiet rebellion against the world's insatiable thirst for perfection, a rebellion that would live on long after his passing. The tea community was the first to feel the shock of Rikyū's death. For his disciples, it was as though a light had gone out. Rikyū had been more than a teacher. He had been a guide, a philosophical beacon that illuminated the spiritual path of tea. His Zen-inspired teachings, which merged with the ritual of tea to create an experience that transcended the physical act of drinking, had been his gift to the world. Now, with his passing, many felt a deep sense of loss. How could they carry on without him? How could they continue his work? Yet, Rikyū's influence was not so easily extinguished. Though his physical form had left the world, his legacy lived on through his disciples, who were now tasked with keeping his teachings alive. Among these disciples was Yamamoto Genbei, who would go on to teach Rikyū's version of tea to others, carefully preserving the traditions of his master. Rikyū, another of his students, was known for spreading the wabi-sabi aesthetic to other tea masters, and through his work, Rikyū's influence expanded beyond the walls of the tea room. Rikyū's philosophy of simplicity, his belief in the beauty of imperfection, in the transient nature of life, became the cornerstone of the tea tradition that followed him. His disciples did not simply replicate his techniques. They embodied his spirit, passing down his ethics, aesthetic, and approach to tea to the generations that followed. Rikyū's death, though tragic, became a defining moment in the history of Japanese tea. His influence could be felt not only in the tea rooms, but also in the very soul of the practice. The subtle ceremonies he had crafted continued to serve as a means for quiet reflection, a bridge between the material and the spiritual world, and through his disciples, Rikyū's legacy remained unbroken. The impact of Rikyū's philosophy was immeasurable. His aesthetic principles went beyond the confines of tea. They infiltrated art, architecture, and the way the Japanese saw beauty in the world. Rikyū had taught that true beauty did not lie in elaborate decoration or extravagance, but in humility and imperfection. His teachings became synonymous with a way of living, one that embraced the fleeting beauty of life and accepted the transience of all things. The tea ceremony, once seen as a privileged practice of the elite, had evolved under Rikyū's guidance into an accessible art form. The simplicity of the ceremony, now stripped of luxury, reflected a cultural shift in Japanese society, a move away from the grandeur of wealth and power toward the quiet grace of humility. It was not just the aesthetics of tea that had changed. Rikyū's influence reached far beyond the tea room and began to shape the architectural landscape of Japan. Tea rooms, once grand and elaborate, were redesigned in the spirit of wabi-sabi, embracing simplicity, natural materials, and a sense of imperfect beauty. The use of wood, stone, and clay became the hallmark of the traditional tea room, reflecting a deep respect for nature and the impermanence of life. The quiet Zen gardens, which often accompanied these tea rooms, were also shaped by Rikyū's teachings, becoming spaces not just for aesthetic beauty but for quiet meditation. One of Rikyū's disciples, Oda Uraku, later remarked, "Rikyū taught us that true beauty lies not in what we build, but in how we live." The simplicity of the tea room is a reflection of the way we should live, humble, aware, and accepting of the world as it is. Rikyū's designs for tea utensils also played a significant role in shaping Japanese aesthetic principles. No longer were tea bowls adorned with gilded designs and intricate patterns. Instead, they were made from rough clay, unpolished, and imperfect. The bamboo whisk became the ideal symbol of this new aesthetic, simple, organic, and crafted with respect for nature's imperfections. Tea utensils, once seen as decorative objects, were now valued for their usefulness, their natural beauty, and their connection to the Zen principles of simplicity and impermanence. In the realm of art, Rikyū's aesthetic found its way into other forms of expression. The wabi-sabi philosophy that he had introduced into tea, the idea that beauty could be found in imperfection, in the unfinished and the worn, found its way into calligraphy, ceramics, and even painting. The artists who followed Rikyū began to embrace the idea that true beauty lay not in perfect execution, but in natural expression. One of Rikyū's students, Korin Ogata, would later adopt his ideas in his work with Japanese ceramics. The simplicity of his pieces, much like Rikyū's tea bowls, celebrated imperfection as a means of embracing the transient beauty of life. He began to design pieces that were rough, organic, and deliberately unrefined, celebrating the beauty of what was often considered flawed. Rikyū's teachings also impacted Japanese poetry. The haiku, a poetic form that emphasizes brevity, simplicity, and the beauty of nature, was embraced by tea practitioners and poets alike. The Zen poets of the time, inspired by Rikyū's wabi-sabi aesthetic, began to write in a manner that reflected his philosophy: simple, natural, and imbued with a deep sense of impermanence. One of Rikyū's favorite haikus, which he often recited in the tea room, captured this sense of impermanence perfectly. The cherry blossom falls. A single petal drifts away, and with it, the spring. In this short verse, Rikyū saw the essence of life, the fleeting beauty of the cherry blossom, the ephemeral nature of spring, was a reminder that life itself was temporary, that all things must pass, and that the imperfection of that passage was what made it beautiful. Rikyū's influence, in the end, was not just limited to tea or the arts. His philosophy shaped the very fabric of Japanese culture, creating a new way of seeing the world. His ideas of simplicity, humility, and the acceptance of imperfection became the cornerstone of Japanese thought. And through his tea, he brought these principles into the hearts of his followers. Though Rikyū's life ended tragically, his teachings lived on in every bowl of tea, in every calligraphy brushstroke, in every piece of ceramic art. His legacy was not one of power, but of peace, peace found in simplicity, in the fleeting nature of life, and in the quiet beauty of the imperfect. The world that Sen-no Rikyū inhabited may seem distant to us today, a world of samurai, warlords, and shifting allegiances. Yet his influence is still felt across the centuries, echoing through the quiet spaces of tea rooms, art galleries, and even the hearts of those who seek peace in the simple, humble moments of daily life. Rikyū's life was not one of grandiose achievements or political triumphs. His legacy was not built on the foundation of power or wealth, but on a quiet, unassuming act, the preparation of tea. Tea, in his hands, became a spiritual path, a philosophy, and a way of connecting with the world. And through this simple practice, he reshaped not just a tradition, but the way an entire culture viewed beauty and existence. Yet, despite the tragic end to his life, Rikyū's teachings have never faded. They have endured, evolving into something that transcends time and place. In a world that often feels dominated by noise, by the push to do more, to achieve more, Rikyū's wisdom speaks to us as clearly today as it did in his time. His teachings about wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, and the value of simplicity have found their way into the hearts of countless individuals, not only in Japan but across the globe. Rikyū's life was built on the principles of Zen Buddhism, and his approach to tea was an extension of that philosophy. He taught that true beauty was not in what was perfect, but in what was imperfect. The cracks in a tea bowl, the roughness of a hand-carved spoon, the simplicity of a tea room devoid of ornamentation. These were all reflections of the truth of existence. Life, like tea, was fleeting. It was imperfect, and it was in that very imperfection that true beauty was found. This philosophy, known as wabi-sabi, was not a trend or a passing fad. It was a way of living, a way of seeing the world not as something to be conquered or controlled, but as something to be embraced, flaws and all. Wabi-sabi, Rikyū once said, is the way of seeing beauty in the imperfect, the transient, the humble. It is the way of accepting the world as it is, without pretense, without the need for perfection. His wabi-sabi aesthetic redefined what it meant to appreciate beauty. In an era obsessed with luxury and excess, Rikyū demonstrated that true elegance lay in humility. He taught that beauty was not in what could be seen, but in what could be felt in the quiet moments, when the world slowed down, when the mind was cleared, and when we could breathe deeply, accepting the imperfections of both ourselves and the world around us. Rikyū's influence went beyond tea. The principles he embodied seeped into art, architecture, and daily life. The way tea bowls were crafted changed. No longer were they perfect porcelain creations, but bowls with character, texture, and depth. Tea rooms became more than places to serve tea. They became places of spiritual reflection, spaces where the aesthetic of simplicity and natural beauty transformed not only the environment but the soul. In the world of art, his influence is unmistakable. Japanese ceramics, often influenced by the principles of wabi-sabi, embraced the raw beauty of imperfection. Pieces of pottery that were once dismissed as flawed became cherished for their rough edges and asymmetrical forms, much like the tea bowls Rikyū so loved. In calligraphy, the brushstrokes no longer needed to be perfectly straight or meticulously planned. The beauty was found in the spontaneity, in the life that flowed through the strokes. Even in architecture, the principles of wabi-sabi began to take root. The Zen-inspired gardens and tea houses of Japan reflect Rikyū's influence. With their focus on natural materials, simple designs, and a deep respect for the impermanence of all things. Rikyū's tea rooms, stripped of elaborate decorations, adorned only with simple bamboo, wood, and stone, became symbols of tranquility, spaces where one could find refuge from the outside world and reconnect with the essence of life. Despite the tragic end to his life, Rikyū's legacy is far from diminished. In fact, his influence only grew stronger after his death. His life, though cut short, became a symbol of the delicate relationship between power and art, a relationship that was often fragile, easily broken by ambition and suspicion. But in Rikyū's teachings, we find a path that transcends political intrigue and earthly power. He showed the world that the truest form of beauty and strength was found not in force or dominance, but in humility and the quiet acceptance of the impermanence of life. Rikyū's death at the hands of Hideyoshi, once seen as a tragic end to a man who had brought so much peace to the world, was in some ways the culmination of his teachings. The fragility of life and the impermanence of all things had been central to his philosophy. It was not about living forever, but about living fully in the moments that we have, accepting the changes, and embracing the beauty that is present in every fleeting instant. Rikyū's legacy is seen in the quiet moments of tea that are still practiced today. When a tea master pours the tea, when the whisk stirs the water, when the bowl is passed from hand to hand, Rikyū's spirit lives on. His influence is felt not just in the tea room, but in the way people approach life, in the way they appreciate the small things, in the way they see beauty in imperfection. Even today, the wabi-sabi philosophy continues to shape the world's understanding of beauty. It has reached far beyond the walls of Japan and found a place in the hearts of people around the world. In a culture obsessed with perfection, with youth, and with flawlessness, Rikyū's message of embracing imperfection, of finding peace in simplicity, remains a timeless and universal truth. The flower falls, the moon fades, the winds blow, but the beauty of the moment is eternal. These words, spoken by Rikyū and echoed through the generations, remind us that life is fragile, beauty is fleeting, and in accepting this impermanence, we find the true depth of life itself. Rikyū's life and philosophy are a gift, a reminder that the most profound truths are often the simplest. He did not need wealth or fame, nor did he desire power. His legacy lives on in the moments of stillness he created, in the peace he shared, and in the quiet revolution of simplicity and humility he championed. Rikyū's death became a moment of reflection, but his life, his teachings remain as vibrant as ever. He is remembered not just as a tea master, but as a man who saw the truth in the world's imperfection and transience. His legacy continues to inspire those who seek to find beauty in the simple, the humble, and the fleeting. Sen no Rikyū, though his life was cut short, remains eternal, his influence forever shaping not just tea but the very way we live and see the world. Rikyū's life, though tragically short, was one marked by a profound embrace of simplicity. In an age of opulence and imperial ambition, where warlords and generals clashed for power, Rikyū chose a different path, one that sought peace not through conquest, but through stillness, not through wealth, but through the humble practice of tea. His legacy transcends the act of making tea. It extends into the very essence of living a life of purpose, rooted in humility and awareness of the impermanence of all things. To look at Rikyū's life is to understand the power of embracing the present moment. Tea, to Rikyū, was not just an art, it was a way of being, a meditation that extended beyond the ritual into the core of existence itself. He taught us that beauty lies not in the perfectly symmetrical, not in the carefully planned or constructed, but in the imperfections, in the cracks that give life meaning and depth. Rikyū's philosophy of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, transience, and humility, was not simply about drinking tea. It was about accepting the world as it is, unpolished, unrefined, and unpredictable. In an era obsessed with power and prestige, Rikyū showed that the most profound strength could come from simplicity and stillness. It was in those quiet moments of tea preparation, the delicate movements of the hand, the sound of the water boiling, the slow whisking of the matcha, all of it, Rikyū believed, was a reflection of the way we should live our lives. His teachings, simple yet profound, have spread across generations, shaping not only the culture of Japan but inspiring countless individuals worldwide. From his quiet tea rooms to the tea bowls he chose, every element of his philosophy was a conscious expression of his belief in mindfulness. It was not the grand gestures of life that mattered, but the quiet, humble acts that resonated with true beauty. Through tea, Rikyū invited us to see the world not as something to be dominated, but as something to be respected and embraced in all its imperfection. Though Rikyū's life was cut short, his influence continues to be felt in Japan and around the world. He is remembered not just as a tea master, but as a spiritual guide and a philosopher whose teachings on peace, simplicity, and humility have shaped the way we see beauty and existence. Rikyū's teachings have woven themselves into the very fabric of Japanese culture, influencing everything from art to architecture, from calligraphy to ceramics. The wabi-sabi philosophy, which embraces imperfection, fleetingness, and humility, became central to the way Japanese people understand the world. It is the quiet acceptance of impermanence, the understanding that all things, no matter how beautiful, will one day fade. In the world of tea, Rikyū's influence cannot be overstated. His approach to tea was not just a matter of technique, but a way of life. He redefined the tea ceremony, shifting its focus from wealth and status to mindfulness and reflection. The tea bowls he chose were no longer finely polished works of art, but rough-hewn pieces that showed the imprint of time. These bowls were not about perfect symmetry, but about the quiet beauty found in their imperfections, cracks, that told the story of the hands that made them. Rikyū's influence on tea utensils and the very design of tea rooms has shaped the way these spaces are created today. Tea rooms became more than just places to drink. They became places of spiritual reflection, spaces where the aesthetic of simplicity and natural beauty transformed not only the environment, but the soul. His influence on art was just as profound. Japanese ceramics underwent a transformation under Rikyū's guidance, as tea masters began to favor simpler, less ornate pieces. Wabi-sabi, the aesthetic of simplicity and natural beauty, became central to the Japanese ceramic tradition. Artists no longer sought to create perfect objects. Instead, they embraced the beauty of imperfection and rustic elegance. Ikebana, Japanese flower arranging, and calligraphy were also influenced by Rikyū's Zen principles. In Ikebana, the focus shifted from creating elaborate designs to highlighting the natural beauty of flowers and the space between them, embracing the idea that simplicity and restraint are the true sources of beauty. In calligraphy, the focus shifted towards spontaneity and fluidity. The brushstrokes were not meant to be perfect, but to express the essence of the moment, embracing the impermanence of life in every stroke. Even in Zen gardens, Rikyū's influence is felt. The design of Zen gardens, with their simplicity, the sparse use of plants, and the use of natural materials, embodies the idea of wabi-sabi. These gardens are designed not to be beautiful in the traditional sense, but to reflect the impermanence of life, the balance between light and shadow, and the temporary beauty of nature. Rikyū's influence also reached beyond Japan, particularly to the West, where the wabi-sabi aesthetic began to be appreciated for its minimalism and natural beauty. Artists, designers, and architects from around the world have been inspired by the Zen principles that Rikyū embraced, and the philosophy of embracing imperfection has become an important part of contemporary artistic thought. Rikyū's legacy is not confined to the tea ceremony, nor to any single tradition. His teachings reach into the very way we experience the world. Through his quiet dedication to simplicity, through his humble yet profound acts, He reshaped not only tea, but the way we see and appreciate beauty itself. He taught that beauty is not something that can be manufactured or created. It is something that exists naturally in the world around us, in the fleeting moments of life that we often overlook. Rikyū's death, though tragic, marks not the end of his legacy, but its deepest expression. His life was a quiet reminder that even in a world obsessed with achievement and perfection, there is another way to live, a way rooted in mindfulness, humility, and the acceptance of life as it is. Though his life was cut short by the political intrigue of his time, Rikyū's influence has only deepened with the passage of time. His teachings continue to inspire not only the practitioners of tea, but anyone who seeks to live with greater mindfulness, authenticity, and simplicity. He is remembered not as a tea master alone, but as a philosopher, a spiritual guide, and a visionary whose teachings on beauty, imperfection, and transience continue to resonate across generations. Rikyū's legacy lives on in every bowl of tea, in every Zen garden, in every piece of Japanese pottery, and in every quiet moment of mindfulness. His influence remains a guiding light, one that reminds us to embrace life as it is fleeting, imperfect, and profoundly beautiful. Rikyū's legacy transcends the art of tea itself. It is far from being confined to the walls of tea rooms or the delicate utensils he crafted with his hands. His influence and teachings have touched the very essence of life. His wisdom has rippled out from the tea room and into the hearts of those who seek something deeper, something more than just wealth, status, or achievement. It lives in those who, like Rikyū, embrace the imperfection of life, who find beauty in simplicity, and who understand that life itself is fragile and fleeting. It is in this quiet acceptance of the transient nature of life that Rikyū's most profound teaching resides. Rikyū's life and his philosophy remind us that even in the most challenging moments, there is always a way to create peace, to find beauty, and to live fully in the present, no matter how imperfect or fleeting it may seem. Through his teachings, Rikyū has shown that it is not the external world the battles fought, the wars won, or the fortunes gained that holds true significance. Instead, it is the quiet moments of mindfulness, the act of being fully present, accepting life as it is, in all its impermanence, that brings us true peace. Though Rikyū's life was cut short by the political intrigue of his time, and his death came at the hands of the very man he had served, his legacy has only grown stronger with each passing generation. His teachings have outlived the conflicts of his age, continuing to influence not just the world of tea, but the broader cultural landscape of Japan, and even extending to people around the world. The simplicity of his philosophy, the Zen-inspired approach to life he espoused, has found its way into the hearts of artists, poets, and designers alike, all of whom have been inspired by his ability to see the world through a lens of imperfection, transience, and acceptance. His life was a quiet testament to the power of mindfulness, the power of being in the moment, of embracing the present with an open heart. His philosophy continues to teach us that true strength does not come from external power or material wealth, but from the inner peace that comes with accepting the world around us, exactly as it is. Rikyū's wabi-sabi philosophy, his belief in the beauty of imperfection, in the fragility of life, and in the transient nature of all things, serves as a powerful reminder that we do not need to strive for perfection to find meaning in our lives. In fact, imperfection itself is what makes life whole, what makes it real. In his last moments, Rikyū understood the profound truth of life's impermanence. His acceptance of this truth brought him a peace that few men ever attain, a serenity that comes from the understanding that everything, no matter how precious, is temporary. He embraced the inevitable with quiet grace, and in doing so, he found his own inner peace. He had lived his life in a way that reflected his belief that the greatest wisdom lies not in control, but in acceptance. Rikyū once said, "The flower blooms, and it fades, but in its fleeting beauty, it is complete." These words, so simple yet so profound, encapsulate the essence of his life's work. The fleeting beauty of the flower, like the fleeting beauty of all things, is what makes it so valuable. The very fact that it will fade away makes it all the more precious in the moment. His death, while tragic, marked the end of a life lived with purpose, humility, and integrity. But the principles he lived by of simplicity, of embracing imperfection, and of seeking peace through mindfulness continue to resonate, echoing through the years, still teaching us lessons that are as relevant today as they were in his time. These teachings remind us that in a world obsessed with achievement, with the need to succeed, to control, and to perfect, the most profound beauty can often be found in what is overlooked, in the cracks, the flaws, the quiet moments of reflection, and the impermanence of life itself. Rikyū's legacy lives on, not just in the art of tea, but in the hearts of those who seek to live authentically, who choose to embrace simplicity, and who find beauty in the fleeting nature of life. His teachings offer a way to live fully, by accepting life as it is, embracing imperfection and transience instead of fearing them. Rikyū's life was a reflection of the truths he held dear, that the greatest wisdom lies not in control, but in acceptance. That true beauty is not in perfection, but in the imperfection of the world around us. His life and his death remind us that the most meaningful moments are those when we can truly let go, when we can truly accept life as it is, without the need for perfection or achievement. In those moments, we can find peace, just as Rikyū did. And in that peace, we find the greatest beauty of all the beauty of the present. Rikyū's legacy extends beyond tea, beyond art, beyond philosophy. It transcends the boundaries of time, continuing to influence generations long after his passing. His teachings are not confined to the tea room or the intricacies of the ceremony. They live in the way we approach life, in the way we see the world, and in the way we choose to live authentically. Rikyū's life teaches us that true peace comes not from external circumstances, but from within, from the quiet acceptance of the fleeting nature of life, and from the beauty found in its imperfection. He is remembered not just as a tea master, but as a man who understood that the truest beauty lies not in perfection, but in embracing the imperfect, the transient, and the momentary. In the end, Rikyū's life was an invitation to live mindfully and authentically, to find peace in simplicity, and beauty in imperfection. His death, though tragic, only served to deepen his legacy, making him a timeless symbol of the quiet wisdom that can be found in embracing the present moment, in accepting life as it is, and in celebrating the fleeting beauty that surrounds us every day. Rikyū's teachings are a gift to all of us. His life and philosophy remind us that peace, beauty, and meaning are not things to be chased, but things to be found within, in the quiet of a tea ceremony, in the simplicity of the moment, and in the acceptance of life's impermanence.